Hello there. We've been talking about the Constitution and what's in the Constitution. Now we're going to talk about the concept of federalism, which is what, in part, the Constitution is about, the relationship between the national government and the state governments and the powers of the national government and the state governments. But that interrelationship is called federalism. Uh, in a federal system, from our notes, government is divided between the national government and subnational levels. In the United States, the state governments are the most important level. Local governments are units of states. Each level of government has its own powers and responsibilities, but often their spheres of influence overlap. This multi level form of government, while not unique to the United States, isn't the most common form of government in the world. Federalism provided the basis of compromise at the Philadelphia Convention in the early days of the country between the supporters of a strong national government and those delegates who favored remaining retaining rather retaining state traditions and state power over their people, almost exclusive of anything controlling over them like a national government. Well, let's define federalism. The federal government's divided into more than one level. Different bodies share power over the same groups of people. Every citizen of the United States must obey both federal laws and the laws of his or her state. Citizens may also vote for their representatives in both state and federal elections. Countries like Germany, Canada, India also have federal systems. A unitary government is a government where there's only one central government, and that central government has authority over the entire nation. There are no levels of government that share power. Japan, France, Great Britain all operate under unitary governments. Most countries today either have a federal or a unitary form of government. There's also a form of government called a confederation. Confederation is an association of states with some authority delegated to a national government. The states in that system, however, retain most of the power, but the national government is authorized to carry out some functions, such as diplomatic relations. Although rare today, many of the former Soviet republics have either stayed in union with Russia under the Russian Federation or formed a confederation with Russia. Think of the Confederacy. When the southern states broke from the northern states, they did so there would not be a strong national government over them. And in fact, that's why the Civil War came about, because the southern states said, well, we don't want President Lincoln and the federal government telling us we can't have slaves. We can't buy black people and use them as essentially chattel. An abomination, of course, in our minds today, but that was the way of the South. And that's why you had the Civil War, and the government that they created was a confederation. Power retained in primarily the states, but there was a weak national government over the Confederated States of America. But they didn't want to give it too much power because they didn't want to have any possibility of somebody telling us in Georgia what to do outside of Georgia. In other words, each of those states wanted primary control, with only slightly overarching uh, government or national government, a weak one, absolutely. So, reserved powers. Uh, there are powers reserved for the federal government. Power is reserved for state governments. Creating local levels of government, making and enforcing laws, regulating the economy, regulating interstate commerce, collecting taxes. All matters related to this issue of federalism, located in Article 4, Section 2. We also have the requirement of return, extradition of fugitive criminals arrested in one state to the state in which the crime was committed for prosecution. Send them back for prosecution, although it is developed as a discretionary decision over time. The Privileges and Immunities Clause, that's in Article 4, Section 2 of the Constitution. It also helps unify the states by assuring that all citizens are treated equally when they travel from state to state. Intergovernmental relations today. Dual federalism. Each level of government has distinct responsibilities that don't overlap. Cooperative federalism, another term. Levels of government share responsibility. There are shared costs under this intergovernmental relationships under our system today. Sharing costs to receive federal aid, states must pay a part of a program, but they will get money from the federal government. Federal guidelines are provided to receive funding, grants, money sent to the states from the federal government. State programs have to follow federal rules and regulations. And there's shared administrations under this intergovernmental relationships between the federal government helping the states. Though programs have to adhere to basic federal guidelines, they are administered according to the state's directives. But there are federal guidelines that cannot be overlooked, and they must be followed. Fiscal federalism is another term, the system of distributing federal money to state governments. And a lot of money comes from the federal government to support state governments. Years ago, I was the administrator for the district attorney. We received in McLennan County, where my district attorney's office was located, McLennan County received a block grant yearly from the federal government for use in county matters and running the county. The federal block grant was usually spent on, most of it, if not the entirety, on the operation of the district attorney's office, because we do prosecution in a district attorney's office, or did when I was there, for both misdemeanors and prosecutions of felony matters, the more serious crimes, including capital punishment. And a capital crime costs a lot of money to prosecute, as does all of the prosecutions of district attorneys. So, there's about a quarter of a state's fiscal spending is derived, 25%, from federal grant money, federal funding. Money is distributed through relatively restrictive categorical grants for specific categories and block grants. Block grants allow states more spending discretion because it's a big block of money, and then the state decides where it goes. Like I said, the money that the state of Texas got from the federal government one year, the block grant that came to McLennan County Commissioner's Court, which is the administrative body for the for county governments in the state of Texas, allocated it to the district attorney's office. Anyway, but that's just an example of how it's done. Mandates. can create economic hardship for states when Congress creates financial obligations for the states without providing funding for those obligations. So if the federal government decides, oh, well, we're going to mandate that you do this kind of action in your state and local governments, well, that's difficult if Congress is saying you got to do it, but we're not going to give you any money to do it. So states are very not fond and will fight the whole idea of mandates versus grants. Grants and aid are the main instrument the national government uses to both aid and influence states and localities. Grants and aid, so specific grants for specific reasons. That provides aid for specific projects and influences, therefore, the states and localities on what the federal government wants done. Whereas categorical grants can be used only for very specific purposes or categories, in other words, of state and local spending. State and local agencies can obtain categorical grants only by meeting certain qualifications and by applying for those grants. Many such federal regulations, is accomplished, or much of the much federal regulation is accomplished by strings that are attached to categorical grants, such as non-discrimination provisions. In order to enforce non-discrimination laws, well, if you want money from us, when we send this grant, it cannot be used in any discriminatory way because we're putting non-discrimination provisions in here. So we see that you're discriminating against a certain any group because of their race, color, national origin, whatever. Give us the money back. And the states and localities don't want to give the money back once they get it. Block grants. Block grants, again, another definition, support broad programs in areas such as community development and social services. Block grants provide more flexibility since states and communities have discretion in deciding how to spend the money. Okay, let's move forward here. By the way, if you'll look in your notes that we're discussing right now, you'll find some test questions that fall from this. You might want to look at this as well. So let's talk about the constitutional basis of federalism. The Supremacy Clause. The Supremacy Clause is located in Article 6 of the Constitution. The Supremacy Clause, if you will look at your Constitution, and by the way, I do want you to read the Constitution because that's what we're testing on. We're testing on the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and the relationship of the states and the federal government. That's our issue for the exam. The Constitution deals with national laws, treaties made by the national government, held as supreme law of the land. In case of discrepancy, federal laws supersede, usually, state laws. The enumerated powers are located in Article 1, Section 8, and those are powers that the national government, is specifically to Congress, doesn't deal with the states. 10th Amendment, which is in the Bill of Rights, which are the first 10 amendments to the Constitution tacked on because some of the founding fathers who were involved in drafting of the original Constitution were not pleased with rights being protected, and so the first 10 amendments were adopted soon after the Constitution was adopted, and those 10 amendments talk about rights that those guys felt were crucial to maintain a free society. We're going to be addressing that. Uh, Implied powers. Let's talk about that for a moment. In 1819, the Supreme Court in McCulloch versus Maryland, uh, the Supreme Court in case in which states were battling the formation of a national bank. We don't want a national bank. No, no, no. We're gonna fight that. The Supreme Court under Chief Justice John Marshall, and John Marshall is considered our greatest Chief Justice because the decisions that he oversaw and guided through the court really helped define our country as it is today. The Supreme Court under Marshall ruled against the states, thereby reinforcing the supremacy of the national government. We also have under the implied powers the elastic clause, also called the necessary and proper clause, and that's in the last paragraph of Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. That necessary and proper clause gives Congress the authority to pass any laws necessary to carry out its duties enumerated in the Constitution. The elastic clause, as interpreted in McCulloch versus Maryland, also allows Congress to act on implied powers that are not specifically defined in the Constitution. A broad interpretation, is it not? Furthered by the case of Gibbons versus Ogden in 1824, we saw an expansion of congressional power to regulate commerce. In other words, Congress, the federal government's going to maintain its power as best as possible. The full faith and credit clause is in Article 4, Section 1. It requires each state to formally recognize the documents and judgments handed down by courts in other states, and it helps coalesce the state laws under a national umbrella. Extradition. Again, a power where the states are required to, when there is a criminal that has escaped to another state, if they're found, the state where the guy ran away from is requesting the other state to send him back, and that is a responsibility for them to do. Okay, let's see. Well, that takes us through some degree of what I wanted to say. Let me look through some of my other notes that I have here that will address a couple of things. Where are we? Oh, by the way, state powers, the police powers. When we're talking about state powers, we're talking about police powers. We're not talking just about Adam 12, old TV show in the 70s or whatever, or 80s, about a couple of cops in a patrol car in Los Angeles. Anyway, police powers we're referring to, in terms of state powers, the powers to protect health, safety, welfare, and morals of the citizenry. Well, the whole idea of the first 10 amendments of the Constitution were added because, as I said earlier, that's a cat passing by. This cat is passing by. He wants to say goodbye because he does not need to be on my lap. But he does this every time, as you may think he did in our last visit. So anyway, let me find, where did I put that other note? Okay, yes, here we are. And we talked about the express powers, implied powers, the denied powers. We talked about, denied powers that the Constitution denies to the federal government. Writ of habeas corpus can't be suspended. The Constitution says that the supreme law of the land is the Constitution, and federal laws take precedent over state laws. That's Article 6 of the Constitution. State powers, again, reserved to the states. The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution nor prohibited by it to the states are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. That's the 10th Amendment to the Constitution to protect the states. Again, overlapping powers, powers to levy taxes, borrow money, charter corporations, and then state-to-state relations, full faith and credit clause. Each state must honor other states' public acts and records, Article 4 and 1. A citizen of one state is a citizen of every state and is entitled to all the privileges and immunities of those states, Article 4, Section 2, Clause 1. Anyone who's charged with a crime in one state and escapes to another state must be returned to the state where the crime was committed. Article 4, Section 2, Clause 2, extradition, like we said. Congress may admit new states to the Union, but no new states can be created within the boundaries of an existing state. How about that? No new state within the boundaries of another state can be created without the approval of Congress and the state legislatures concerned. That's out of Article 4, Section 3. Okay. The establishment of the legislative branch, the judicial branch, and the executive branch. That's part of the Constitution as well. Let's see. Okay. Oh, I've got one more set of notes here that I wanted to look at. Well, I'll tell you what. I'll make another recording where we'll go through the amendments to the Constitution with a strict and strong examination of the Bill of Rights in particular. Well, I'll tell you what, let's go ahead and do the Bill of Rights, the 10 amendments to the Constitution. I know you want to go get something to eat or rest. I understand, but let's go ahead and do it. Let's go ahead and do it quickly. The first 10 amendments to the Constitution. The First Amendment. Well, everybody knows, I assume, that the First Amendment guarantees the freedom of religion, speech, and the press, and protects the right of assembly. In other words, people can gather together and have a political powwow or a protest or whatever. First Amendment says Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or the press or the right of the people to peaceably assemble and to petition the government for a redress of government. Your freedom to say, okay, Mr. Trump, you're an idiot. Or, okay, Mr. Biden, all of us are standing out here saying that you're an idiot. Well, you can't say that about the president. Whoever he may be, we'll put you in jail. No, not according to the First Amendment to the Constitution. You have the right to free speech. And that includes criticizing the government. And you have the right to worship God the way you want to, or not worship God. You have the freedom of religion, which implies also that you have the freedom not to be religious. Some people would say that's a religion in and of itself, in a negative sense. But be that as it may. And the freedom of speech. The government can't tell you, you can't say that. Oh, no, you can't say that. Well, there are exceptions. You cannot go into a crowded theater and yell, "Fire!" because that causes a riot, because people are going to be rushing for the exits and people can get killed. We can talk more about that a little bit later, but be that as it may, the also you're protected against. Well, there's a protection of freedom of the press. We cannot shut down a newspaper, or now well, back then that's all we had, and it was not the major newspapers that you have today, but they covered their towns and cities. Freedom of press can say whatever it wants to. The press can criticize the government and the people who are in government, and the government can't say, "Well, you gotta shut this down. We're not going to take any of that kind of criticism. That's bad for the government for you to criticize it." To which the press will say, "Actually, we think it's really good for the government, or at least good for the people of this country, to know when their politicians are doing dumb things or dangerous things." Usually dumb and dangerous go together. Both have D's, but they're dumb and dangerous. Doesn't matter. Whatever the press says is okay, unless it violates certain ideas, or rather the rights of certain individuals that are being addressed. You can sue for libel if it can be proved that there are lies being told about you. So that does not fall under a First Amendment protection. Second Amendment is the right to bear arms, to keep and bear arms. A well-regulated militia being necessary for the security of a free state, and the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be regulated. Now, of course, that was kept as a way to be ready to fight against maybe another British invasion. It was also pushed through by a lot of southern states, saying that, well, we need our guns in case there's any kind of problems in our states, because we have the problem with some of our slaves running away, and we have to go after them. And if they, while they're out, in order to protect their running away from us, buy a gun, well, we ought to have a gun too, anytime, and protect ourselves to go after our not freed slaves, but runaway slaves. Southern states pushed for that. Okay, let us not forget, our country allowed slavery for the longest period of time, and that was an abomination and a sin, but there it is. Third Amendment. This amendment guards against the forced quartering of troops. Now, this was before the American Revolution. British officials forced colonists to quarter, in other words, to house and feed British troops. Well, not going to allow that. We're not going to put American troops, by demand of the government, in people's private homes. No soldier shall, according to the Third Amendment, in time of peace, be quartered in any house without the consent of the owner, nor in time of war, but in a manner to be prescribed by law. If a law gets passed, maybe so. Fourth Amendment protects against unreasonable searches and seizures. What does that mean? Well, according to the amendment, the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. In other words, if the police wants to search your home, they have to go to a magistrate, a judge, and get a search warrant based upon evidence that there's probable cause that that person is violating the law in their home or in their business, like they're selling drugs or selling marijuana, or which is still in most states illegal, and is a federal law. as well for possession of marijuana, and certainly all certain sorts of hallucinogenic drugs and dangerous drugs, that sort of thing. Although President Biden recently pardoned people, a large number of people who were in federal prisons for possession of a minor amount of marijuana. And he said, look, it's a minor amount of marijuana, but the federal government didn't have any, it allowed them to prosecute these people. And that's unnecessary. It was a minor amount. And they shouldn't be in a federal prison for that. A federal prison that's a serious, serious thing to do, to be in a federal prison. They're not pleasant places to be, as any prison would be. But the president could do that. Couldn't do it for states, however, because states have their laws against drugs, and he has no responsibility over deciding what state laws can do, unless there would be some constitutional amendment saying that marijuana is illegal now, or some law that would present that. That's way down the road. I think probably. So, go to the judge, and if he says, I don't see that you have any evidence that there's something going on, well, we want to just make sure. No, that's not good enough. We need some degree of reasonable evidence that indicates that there's something wrong going on, or a criminal violation, to allow you to go search and see somebody in their private home. The Fifth Amendment to the Constitution says that a trial by jury and due process of law, this guards against, are covered by the Fifth Amendment, and the Fifth Amendment guards against double jeopardy, which is being charged twice for the same offense, and it protects against self-incrimination. And the amendment reads, no person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime unless or on a presentment or indictment of a grand jury, except in cases arising in the land or naval forces or in the militia when in actual service in time of war or public danger. Nor shall any person be subject for the same offense to be twice put in jeopardy of life or limb, nor shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself, nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, a trial. Nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. Yeah, the government can take your property if there's a superhighway that has to come through the middle of your house. They can take your property, but they got to pay you what it's worth. But I love my house. Well, yeah, and we appreciate that, and we're very sorry, but this highway's coming down through this way, and this is the only place that will pay you what it's worth, without a doubt. Sixth Amendment. This amendment outlines the rights of the accused, including the right to have a speedy and public trial, quote, speedy and public trial, the right to be informed of the charges made against him, the right to call witnesses in his defense, and the right to have an attorney in his defense. The rights of someone accused of a crime. Sixth Amendment says, in all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury of the state and district wherein the crime shall have been committed, which district shall have been previously ascertained by law, and to be informed of the nature and cause of the accusation, to be confronted with the witnesses against him, to have compulsory process for obtaining witnesses in his favor, and to have the assistance of counsel for his defense. You're entitled to a lawyer, and if you can't afford one, one will be provided. Now, that's not in the Constitution, but it is in an amendment to the Constitution later in a Supreme Court decision in interpreting the Constitution, rather. Uh, Seventh Amendment lays out rules for common law, and he says in the suits of common law where the value of the controversy will exceed $20, right to trial by jury uh, shall be preserved, and no fact tried by a jury shall be otherwise re-examined in any court of the United States than according to the rules of the common law. Don't worry about the Seventh Amendment, okay? That's really lawyer stuff. Eighth Amendment. The Eighth Amendment protects against cruel and unusual punishments. For instance, it says, excessive bail shall not be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishment inflicted. In other words, if you're arrested, well, we're going to put a $1 million bail against you. Well, I'm a teacher. Put $1 million bail on me, I ain't getting out of jail, ever. And no excessive fine. Oh, you ran the red light. That's the fine is $10,000. No. Cruel and unusual. We're going to beat you at this. We're going to tie you up to a tree and beat you until you pass out. That's cruel. It's unusual. Ninth Amendment to the Constitution. This amendment ensures that the individual's rights are not enumerated in the Constitution are secure. That is, these rights should not be automatically infringed upon because they are omitted from the Constitution. Quote, the Ninth Amendment says, the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. 10th Amendment to the Constitution. Well, we hit this already, but let's go again. This amendment limits the powers of the federal government by reserving for the states all powers that are not explicitly granted to the federal government by the Constitution, nor denied in the Constitution to the states. The 10th Amendment counterbalances Article 4, which invests the federal government with ultimate legislative authority. And the 10th Amendment reads, the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution nor prohibited by it to the states are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. Goodness gracious. Isn't that something? We can go through some more amendments. And just in brief, the 11th Amendment says that I tell you what. This kind of gets a little boring. We can review them a little bit later. And if you haven't read through those amendments, please do so. And we've talked a little bit about federalism and such. Let me see what else I have here. I think that takes us through for a while. Why don't you eat on this, listen to it, digest it rather, is what I'm trying to say. Again, if you have questions on any of this, if you have any questions about where we're going to be in the next few days, let me know. I will have another lecture up in another couple of days, and we'll hit the new material. Whenever we have new material, I'll have a lecture here for you so that you can use this to give you some basis of understanding if it's a little difficult. And know that I'm there for you. If you have questions, please email me anytime. I'll check my email as often as possible, and if I see an email from one of my students, that's my first priority to get back to you as soon as possible. Please be sure to write me from Canvas email. The inbox allows you to email me directly, and not only will I get it there because I've set it up to where I get it in Canvas inbox, but it also comes to my HCC email account. I would like you to do that too. Set it up so that when I send you an email, that you you can set it up to where you can get, when I put an announcement or well, you don't have to worry about if I send you an email from Canvas, because you'll get it in Canvas. But if I put an announcement up, by the way, which I will do whenever there's something going on that you need to know, please set it up to where you can get an email notification that there's an announcement for you to see. If you have any trouble doing that, let me know, and I'll walk through that either on a video or in an email to you. And again, if you don't have an HCC email address, please set it up through the HCC system. It's not hard to do, but you need one, because the school will not accept email from a Gmail account or AOL account or an iCloud account, anything like that, any commercial account, because, well, they can't protect their system as well without going through either Canvas or the HCC system. So get yourself your HCC email address in case you need to use it. Any questions you have, let me know. I'll respond, and I'll also include any answers to any really good questions, which I'm sure your questions are going to be good, and all the questions I've gotten from everybody have been very sound, and I'm happy to respond to you. And I'll share the answers well, I won't say who wrote, but because when you email me, I'm not sharing that with anybody. But if you had a question that was very pertinent and useful, I'll share the answer. Said, a student has written about this, and it's a good question, and let me tell you what this student said, and this is the answer to it. I'll share it with everybody. Okay, look forward to hearing from you, and I'll be back in touch soon with another video. And I'll be recording it on YouTube and posting it up for you. We will not use WebEx because guess what? It's a real pain, and it doesn't work very well, as many of you have complained about. And so this is free, and I'm working on setting up a channel where it'll be posted. But in the meanwhile, I can put it on WebEx if necessary, or I can put it on our course site. But it'll be posted for you sometime tomorrow, by tomorrow sometime. Okay. So when you see this, it will be tomorrow instead. I'm recording this on Sunday night. So take care. Have a good week, and we'll be back in touch in another day or so. Talk to you later. Take care. Bye-bye.